I'm going to talk a little bit about the Senate. It only takes one senator to hold up a bill. Okay, the House doesn't have a rule like that, but the Senate does. And if you have a senator who is dead set against something being argued, I mean, so even if you get a subcommittee hearing, and even if you get it passed out of subcommittee, and you get a full committee hearing in the Senate, and it passes out of the Senate full committee, and it gets on the Senate calendar, it only takes one senator to block the bill. And so that's why it's important that we have a broad-based advocacy group to go out there and talk to senators, listen to their concerns, and there is going to have to be some give and take along the way. And what I want to talk about briefly here is some of the resistance you're going to see, and your lawmakers may not have resistance, but if they do, they may fall into one of these four categories, because these are the four categories of resistance that I've seen. And there are different strategies that you can use to overcome the resistance in each instance. First of all, you've got law enforcement concerns. You've got some legislators who are very deferential to law enforcement and the views that law enforcement holds. I mean, I'm not being pejorative or critical in any of these statements. I'm just stating facts. There are some legislators who, whenever an issue like this comes up, will go to their local sheriff or will go to somebody else in the law enforcement apparatus, and they'll find out what their views are, and that will inform how they behave. And so in regard to those individuals, it goes back to what Janelle said earlier. We have got to bring law enforcement to the table on this, okay? We have got to, and we have been, I think, trying to respond to their concerns. We've listened to their concerns all along the line, whether you're talking about physicians who will operate like pill mills, whether you're talking about grow facilities that will have it diverted for recreational use, whether you're talking to them about medicinal use of cannabis giving rise to recreational use. I mean, any number of things, but there are strategies and statistics that we have to push back against that. But at some point in time, we're going to have to go ahead and bring them to the table. It's just too difficult and procedurally to bulldoze over top. So if you see along the way changes being made to the bill or things being done to the bill that in a very strict sense don't improve the product, don't improve patient access, don't in your minds make sense, understand that the reason that it's being done is probably to accommodate some of the concerns that have been put forward. And so understand that as we move through. Others may object based on their social conservative values. There are a lot of people in the General Assembly, primarily in the upstate, which tends to be a lot more socially conservative than other parts of the state, who rightly or wrongly equate cannabis, even if it's medicinally related, they view it in the same way that they view extramarital sex or excessive drinking or gambling. They view it as a social vice. That is deeply ingrained in their ethos. That's the way they think about things. And again, treat them with respect, but then go to them and make the arguments in regard to, well, you're okay, aren't you, with opiates being prescribed? And did you know that opiates are derived from opium? And that's a lot more dangerous. And I mean, why doesn't your moral sensibilities extend to that? And so address it in that way, but treat them with respect. And I think in every instance as we go about this, I think you remind them of the will of the people, because the data is overwhelming out there right now. There was a recent poll, I'm sure all of you know, done by Winthrop University. 78% of South Carolinians favor medicinal use of cannabis as authorized by a physician. I'm hard pressed to think of any other issue, regardless of what it might be, whether it's a social issue or a fiscal issue or otherwise, that's going to get 78% of the people to say they're in favor of it. I mean, that kind of issue just doesn't exist out there, quite frankly. And so the evidence in regard to where the people are, the evidence in regard to what the people want, keep coming back to that, because at the end of the day, a politician, regardless of what his or her reservations are, they're ultimately going to want to get reelected. That's their number one desire in every politician. When you peel away everything else, when you peel away the ideologies, you peel away the rhetoric, you peel away everything else, when November comes, they want to get reelected. And so I think there are strategies that we can use in deploying that information, but that's an extremely helpful device. You're going to have resistance among the medical community, and this is counterintuitive for me. I really didn't see this coming, because I would have thought that the Hippocratic Oath and the doctors, and that their primary concern is always going to be the betterment or the health of the patient, and that all of their decisions were going to be driven by what is going to be of medicinal benefit to the patient. What I found out is that's not necessarily the case. There are concerns out there in the South Carolina Medical Association, for instance, regarding doctors authorizing the use of cannabis as a medicine at the same time the federal government still has it as Schedule I drug. They have great concerns in that regard. They have concerns in regard to prescribing anything that hasn't been authorized by the FDA. They have malpractice concerns about authorizing the use of cannabis and being sued by somebody who has a bad experience with that. So we've got to work through those issues with the medical community. Now, generationally, the younger the doctor is, the more success you're going to have, because I think more and more in medical schools now, they are looking at cannabis as a medicinal, a way of addressing problems. I think older doctors, are more difficult to persuade in that regard. But it may well be that your particular legislator is very persuaded by a doctor, because much like some people are governed by what law enforcement think, some legislators are very deferential to the medical community, are very deferential to their doctors back home. And so, depending upon what's of concern to your legislator, there are going to be different strategies that we can deploy or come up with to help you. And I think that's one of the things that will come out of this advocacy group here is help customize the information that will be a particular effectiveness in working with your legislator. And I think that's what SE Compassion can do, can be a resource to you to help you be that advocate. And finally, I would say there are some who are strictly legalists. I mean, they're thinking we can't do anything at the state level when the federal government thinks otherwise. I mean, they don't want to do anything that's going to go against federal law. They don't want to do anything that's going to potentially, run afoul of what the federal government believes. And there are strategies to deal with them as well, because as you know, the past couple of years, the appropriations bills passed by Congress has forbade the Department of Justice from using any of the dollars appropriated to them to enforce the federal laws against states that have authorized the medicinal use of cannabis. So even those that are reluctant in regard to adopting something that's against federal law, there are things that we can do to push back. We can talk about what Congress has done in the appropriations bills in regard to that telling the DOJ not to enforce those federal laws. And we have a recent federal district court decision that upholds those provisos and actually stopped the DOJ from attempting to enforce that Schedule I prohibition in a state that had legalized cannabis for medicinal purposes. So we've got the law in our regard in that way too. So, whether it's in regard to those who are deferential to law enforcement, whether it's those that are socially conservative and they look at cannabis in a certain morally negative or pejorative way, whether they're deferential to doctors in the medical community, or whether or not they're deferential to Washington, D.C., there are arguments and good data that we have to push back in all those respects. Now, in terms of other things that I think are effective advocacy techniques, what I did last session was try to have every senator in that chamber have a similar experience that I had when I worked with Mary Louise, Jill's daughter, and seeing the seizures that she had, and then seeing the changes in her life as a result of CBD oil. Because once you have that personal experience, and once you've moved beyond statistics and you've moved beyond this sort of analytical arguments, and once you've made it personal, the scales fall from your eyes and you stop being somebody who opposes and you become a passionate advocate. And I truly believe that. And I think we did see some positive effects in that regard in the Senate. We had just one individual, for instance, Senator Darrell Jackson from Richland, was initially opposed to medicinal cannabis. But he came up to me at the end of the legislative session and told me, as a result of the stories you told, and as a result of some of those families involved in those stories talking to him afterwards, he's come around now and has said to me, how can I be of assistance to you? So this works. So your personal stories, and I would wager that everybody here, if you're here, you probably have a personal story. You probably have a family member that's struggling. Take those stories and don't be afraid to share them with your lawmaker. I mean, it may be uncomfortable. It may be something that you don't necessarily want to do, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you had told me 4 or 5 years ago that my number one legislative priority going into 2017 was going to be a comprehensive medical marijuana bill, I would have said that you were crazy. It wasn't even on my horizon. But it was that personal story and then seeing the difference that it made that changed me, and it can change your legislator as well. There's lots of good data out there now. I mean, law enforcement has historically come up with data that is either out of date or misleading, and trying to make the argument that a medicinal marijuana program is going to lead to increased recreational use or is going to lead to a number of social ills. And the ironic thing is the data we see coming out of states now, and we have 26 states now that have comprehensive medical marijuana programs. What you're seeing, the data in the states is remarkable. What you're seeing is a lot of reduced medical costs. You're seeing Medicaid costs go down. You're seeing healthcare costs go down. You're seeing productivity of workers going up as they're able to get back on the job. If they're workers' comp, they can get back to being productive. I mean, these are empirically based studies. So those that want that data, those that want more than the personal stories and want more than just the moral reasons, if they want the nuts and bolts, if they want the dollars and cents, if they want that cost-benefit analysis, we can give that to them as well, because the data is out there. I think it's even out there in regard to in states that have adopted comprehensive medical marijuana programs, you've seen recreational use go down, because when you have the state involved in the control and the regulation of cannabis, I think that as a corollary to that, you see it drop. And so we have arguments we can use to rebut what law enforcement is putting out there. I talked a little bit about the polls. Again, always come back to that. 78% of South Carolinians believe this should be a decision made by a doctor and a patient. That's an extraordinarily powerful argument as to why should 170 politicians be the one that stand in between what a doctor thinks is of medicinal benefit to a patient. Very powerful argument there. It's hard to rebut that. And so and most people get that intuitively. That's why you got 78% of South Carolinians, Republicans, Democrats across the board, doesn't matter. 78% is huge. And then lastly, you can point to what other states have done. You can talk about the 26 states and how you've got more states pending. And you get to a critical mass, and at a certain point in time, it just tips over the top. And so we've got a lot of things going for us. One of the purposes of SC Compassion is sort of to serve as a resource. I'll be working with Janelle and with Jill and with other people at SC Compassion to come up with these arguments in each of these areas and address them to your particular legislator. And you can then, take and use what you think is most effective. The last thing I'll say is this. Unlike the last couple of years, the bill that I'm going to be filing, and we have pre-filing in December, which is when you can file all the bills. It's a month before session starts. It's not going to be a bill with just my name on it or one or two people's names on it as it's been in the past. I fully expect in the Senate we're going to have a bill with about 17 or 18 co-sponsors, and I think we're going to see a bill. We're going to see a bill in the House that has dozens of sponsors as well, because we saw this during, and Jill alluded to it, the opioids bill at the late last session, and I added on to it at the very end a directive telling DHEC to study whether or not cannabis can be an effective way other than opiates to address PTSD. And we got it passed in the Senate, and it went over to the House, and the conventional wisdom at that time was there's no way with 1 or 2 days left in the session and with law enforcement actively working that body and trying to defeat that amendment, there's no way it's going to pass. And it ended up passing overwhelmingly. That's a litmus test as to how far people have come in just the last 3 years with this issue. So all signs are pointing to 2017 being our year. As we get into the session and as we start, sort of the hand-to-hand combat process of moving it through the system, understand that accommodations need to be made, understand that amendments will have to be made because we need to get this bill through. Now, I'm not going to throw away the principles, and I'm not going to come up with something that isn't workable to people, But I do want to get this thing passed next year, and if we need to improve it on it in subsequent years, that's fine. But next year is a year when it gets passed. It's just too important, and I really think that 2017 is going to be our year. I look forward to, we got a Q&A, I guess, after lunch. Be happy to address on an individual basis questions you have. I'll stick around afterward to talk about it. This, for me, is the #1 legislative priority for 2017, and I do think that the momentum is there to get it passed. Thank you.